Welcome back, ladies and mental gents, to another wanted narration of Billy Bob Space Trucker. On last week's episode, he sneaks into the Capitol using a Borg suit. Emily sneaks into the Capitol using a battle suit disguised as a statue, and then sneaky busybody does this.
Chapitre 35. Deuxième partie. Chief, Sneaky, Busybody. Pimford Weslethorpe III was slowly walking through the Grand Matriarch's estate. He had acquired a chef's uniform and was quick to flatten himself against the wall as any of the guards walked by, which he knew any good spy should do. The Crusticans, for their part, would just glance at him as they walked back and then let their claws click to indicate confusion before moving on by. They'd long ago stopped trying to figure out guewdians. Once the patrols had walked by him, Pimford would then start walking again, humming the guewdians' national anthem to himself softly in an attempt to keep his courage up. Here he was, deep in the estate of the Grand Matriarch, with pockets stuffed full of sleeping drugs, and no one was any the wiser to his clever subterfuge. Of course it helped that guewdians had such an awful reputation for espionage and being secretive that the fact he hadn't simply told everyone he was a spy made them figure he was just another weird guewdian, just doing his job. Emily had given him a few tips on how to better do his job while he was here. Don't talk to people unless they talk to you first. Then she also mentioned, don't tell people you're a spy. That was a good one, he'd even written that one down. Finally, when someone asked what he was doing, he should tell them what he was doing, as if he was really who he claimed to be. That one was just genius, but it was taking a little time to get used to the idea, so mostly he'd just stare at people who asked him things until they either left or let him pass. The estate was massive, with sections of it submerged, so she could switch between her hunting ground and hunting reef freely. The massive creature also had quite a large number of servants picked from guewdians. He'd like to think because everyone loved guewdians, but it was most likely because she knew she could make them cower in fear whenever she wanted. And they doubled as a snack if she got tired of them. Pimford didn't know that, of course. He was making his way through the estate when he slipped into one of the side rooms to get out of the halls for a bit. Then he blinked as he looked around the large room, filled with art and weapons that were apparently trophies of the matriarch's centuries of life and struggle for power. He'd heard many grisly tales about such rooms for matriarchs, but as he looked around, he didn't see any bodies floating in jars or skeletons or the like, so perhaps the stories were just exaggerated to scare young guewdians. But he did see someone else in the room, and he froze for a moment, trying to press himself against the wall and flatten out as if that would stop the maid from seeing him. But once she turned, he gasped. Those full, fat cheeks, that rotund body, that luscious, full coat. She was the most beautiful guewdian he'd ever seen. He stood there, speechless for several seconds as she looked at him.
Hello?
I'm a chef.
He nearly shouted as he tried to control his mind. She was a maid, which meant she couldn't cook right, but that body, she had to be constantly eating to maintain such a wonderful figure. What if she already had a boyfriend who was a chef, husband? He didn't see the traditional cake necklace to signify her betrothal.
Oh, you are? Why are you in the trophy room?
Oh no, she was onto him. Quick, think of something else.
Because I heard the most beautiful maid worked here.
Oh, that's good.
Really? Who?
The guewdian looked around before she realized she was here alone, and her eyes went wide.
Me?
Yes,
Pimford quickly approached her, taking one hand in his own as he spoke.
I've never laid eyes on a more beautiful creature, not even when I saw a majestic burwello eating its body weight in grains.
Oh, you're so romantic.
She swooned for a moment.
But what are you really doing here? You're not allowed in the trophy room.
He gulped.
I would tell you, but I would have to kill you if I did. I'm on a mission of the utmost importance.
She gasped at that.
Like a spy.
I can't say.
He pressed his one forearm to forehead.
Alas, I must not reveal to you what must be done, lest you be a target.
But why are you telling me this much?
Well, if I don't tell you what I'm doing, you don't know. You just know it's important.
She blinked and nodded at that.
Oh, that makes sense. So mysterious.
She then said, as she realized what he was saying,
Is it dangerous?
Very dangerous. But I can't stress enough that I simply cannot reveal to you why I'm really here. Because if I did, I could not live with myself.
Why not?
Because then I'd have to kill you to keep my mission secret, and the world deserves your overwhelming beauty.
He saw her blush under the fur with his words, and then she pulled out a handful of emergency snibble fluffs from the pockets of her uniform to stuff into her mouth to help contain her emotions. He groaned as he saw her, cheeks stuffed full of sugary treats, shaking his head as he held her hand and looked away.
Woof Wong?
Your beauty makes me want to give up my task and run with you to the furthest reaches of space. But our very race requires me to complete this.
Oof, oh, Darwin.
She said, cheeks still full of food.
Yes, I must go now before I lose the nerve to leave your side, but I shall return, and we shall run away together once I can reveal my true identity to you. Do not stray far, my love. I will return. He moved close, clutching his hands in hers before they rubbed cheeks, and he scurried away. She swooned for a moment and gasped with delight at the thought of the mysterious stranger. Oh, if only she knew what his task was.
A guard walked by, looking into the room and seeing the guewdian clasping her hands together, those fat cheeks bulging with food, his face contorting into what his people would consider a sneer. Why were those little fuzzballs so gross?
I found a missy swanger.
She said to the guard, bits of food flying out of her mouth. The guard just clicked his claws in confusion and walked away. Pimford was moving quickly now, only uttering.
Sorry, pardon. Please excuse me.
To the guards he passed rather than flattening himself to the wall like before. He was feeling very aggressive. When he bumped into a guard, he only begged for forgiveness for a single minute before scurrying away. He wasn't sure what demon possessed him. Soon enough, he was in the Grand Matriarch's feasting room, and he nearly threw up at the sight of all the raw meat that had been laid out for her. Then he gasped as he saw her towering over the room, at one end of the long table of food that had been set up for her. Turning, the massive matriarch clicked and hissed.
Who are you?
Chef,
My food is already prepared, you idiot!
need to add something to dessert.
He was standing straight, eyes wide, as he trembled slightly in her presence. She clicked in annoyance and wiggled a long, pointed leg at the far end of the table.
Desserts are down there.
He stood still for a moment.
Go! Get to it! I'm about to eat!
He squeaked and quickly scurried down the massive table. He reached into his pockets, pulling out the bag of pills, as he found a tray full of white, Herculean mush. He started to pull the package of pills from his coat and then fumbled it a bit, nearly dropping it, as he heard some sort of blood-curdling screech. He clutched the package to his chest, looking down in horror as he assumed he'd been found. But instead, the matriarch was just leaning in and shoveling the food into her mouth. He gasped as he saw how quickly she was moving down the line and quickly tried to pull the jar open. But it had one of those damn pinch and twist locks. He struggled with it, looking on in horror as the matriarch ate tray after tray of food that had been left out for her. She was past the appetizers. He pounded the lid on the side of the table, jerking and twisting it as she got closer. When she was halfway through the main course, he finally got the top off, dumping the pills into the white mush and stirring it up with a spoon someone had left behind very quickly, just as she got close. Her bulk moving slowly on those many legs as he squealed and held the tray up for her when she got to him.
You better not have messed this up.
There were stains around her face, bits of things dripping from her mandibles. Clutching the tray, she tilted her head back, dumping it all into her mouth at once, letting the mandibles help guide it in. Then she tossed the tray, and he had to scurry away as she advanced a little further to finish consuming the rest of the food. Once it was all gone, he turned his head, shielding it as she let out a massive belch. Then she rumbled and shifted for a moment.
That mush was good. Better than it usually is at any rate. What's your name, Chef?
He was not prepared for this.
Brimford, Wesselthorpe the Fourth.
That would throw her off his scent.
Any relation to Gurgen Wesselthorpe the Eighth?
Yes, he was my great-uncle, I believe.
He squeaked out then as she reached down, picking him up in her grabber claws instead of her cutting claws.
Well, what did I do?
Nothing. But I want to see if the family trait was genetic.
What trait?
She gave him a squeeze suddenly, and he squeaked out before she chittered and stomped her legs in amusement, giving him another squeeze to hear him squeak. The chittering intensified.
I like you. You're my new head chef.
Then she shuddered for a moment and her mandibles stretched out as she indicated tiredness.
I'm not feeling great. I think I'll take a nap.
Hey, could you let me go?
But she was already tucking her legs in under her body, partially rolling to her side as he was left clutched in against her rumbling upper body. In her sleep, she lightly squeezed him, and as he squeaked out, she rumbled happily. He squirmed and struggled for a moment, but found himself held tightly in place.
Grand Matriarch, we...
A guard had stepped into her room and saw the matriarch slumbering with the guewdian in her claws.
She ate everything and decided to take a nap.
The guard clicked in annoyance.
She's getting more senile every solar cycle.
Turning, the guard walked out as Pimford squeaked again.
Don't worry, I'll tell the other matriarch to fill in for her.
Wait, she won't let me go.
But the door had already closed. Pimford looked around for a moment and then sighed.
Well, I guess I need to wait to be rescued by Mr. Billy Bob, savior of Guewdians.
Billy Bob and Emily were standing in front of the massive door leading to the summit meeting room as he looked up at it.
So why did we lock it again?
To keep them trapped in there.
Wouldn't it make them curious when the security door's locked?
Our agents inside told them it was just a precaution after some rumors.
Well, how do we get in?
She pointed to a side hall on his left.
Through there. We'll unlock a smaller door and slip through. Once you kill the guard still inside, I'll start my speech. Then you go help Amelia.
He nodded and shrugged.
Sounds like a plan. This is amazingly easy so far.
That's when he was slammed into hard from behind with a wave of energy. His shield flickered and failed, and part of the fake fur on the suit caught fire as he was knocked onto his face, cursing hard as inside the suit his head slammed against the display. Quickly he rolled onto his back, seeing a crab with a matter slammer up on a balcony that he'd missed trying to reload. He pulled the ZF-1 up and fired at the same moment as the crab. The bullets tore through the guard, sending the shot wide, but as it hit one of the walls and sent out a shower of debris, the chunks pressed the red button on the side of the ZF-1. Billy Bob cursed louder still and tossed it as far as he could, pulling Emily down and shielding her as the pod exploded. Once it was over, he got up, checking to make sure Emily was all right, as he remembered some of his fur was on fire and then dropped back down, rolling around on the ground.
Jesus Christ! This is the first time that was actually useful!
What? What was useful? Having an exploding weapon? How is that useful?
Emily cried out as she got up and dusted herself off. Billy Bob had put out the fire on his suit and stood up. still partially smoldering as bits of metal could be seen now.
No, not that. That was unfortunate. But I finally used stop, drop, and roll. The way they taught it to us in school, I thought we were going to be on fire far more often in our life than we really were. Then again, it's an American school, so maybe they just play it safe.
Seriously, Billy Bob, why did your weapon explode?
Oh, some debris hit the self-destruct button.
Why does your weapon even have that?
So, you can make it self-destruct? Is this some sort of trick question?
He shrugged then, before moving back over to his black bag.
Okay, no more ZF1. That's cool. I still got this, especially because I've been just deploying figuratively to try this one.
She stepped by him, walking down the security hall.
I'll get the door ready.
Hold on, wait for me!
He said, grabbed the bag, and moving to follow her, stepping ahead as he brought out the axe.
I haven't cleared this area yet.
He glanced at her and clutched the axe in his hands as he stepped forward. But the hallway was empty.
Never can be too careful.
He muttered as she stepped up to the smaller security door.
Okay, keep your axe handy. I'm not sure if there are any guards around the entrance here.
She said as she opened the control panel next to the door. He nodded and stepped up to the door, ready for any trouble. She stood to the side, working on the control panel before it beeped and slid open. There was a crab behind it, turning to see what was going on, but instead found an axe buried in his skull. The crab collapsed and Billy Bob stepped out further, noticing he was on the bottom row of a set of seats. Out in the center, he could hear talking and quickly pulled the final weapon free of his bag. There was supposed to be some fancy hamster, even more important than the one from the Rosie that was here, and he would start to demand answers from the crabs about some sort of past crimes when he got the signal. From what Billy Bob could hear, that discussion had already started. It didn't sound like it was going well when he got to the main floor. The matriarch they'd sent to replace the ginormous one was out in the center, pointing her claws at a cowering hamster in a fancy suit and top hat.
How dare you accuse us of this? Have all of you forgotten who saved the council in the regulation wars? You're all ingrates.
She reared back, claws and legs moving to slam down on the hamster that was turning to run, when a massive thoom broke through the gasps of the diplomats and the matriarch's head disappeared in a mist, a large hole appearing the ceiling beyond her. The body collapsed lifelessly as ichor and mucus started to pour out. There were more screams and gasps as Billy Bob stepped into the light, holding a Barrett 1 caliber rifle. On the side of the receiver was supposed to be printed, anti-material rifle, but Billy Bob had scratched out material and written everything beneath it in red ink.
Attention diplomats! America has arrived!
He broadcast on his suit speakers, and as the few remaining crabs in the summit room charged out, he killed 2 with a single shot that ruptured their upper bodies, and then dropped his rifle so he could cleave the axe through the last of them after catching 2 energy blasts to his right arm, which was now showing even more metal through the fraying fake fur. He looked around at the cowering diplomats and back at Emily.
Anyone you're worried about?
The Greslin.
She pointed at the fish cup counselor in the exosuit.
I'm unarmed,
The Greslin said quickly, raising his metallic arms. Billy Bob glanced back at Emily, who thought it over for a moment, and then looked up at Billy Bob.
He's probably fine. I still have an energy blaster just in case. Get out there and help Amelia.
She pulled out her pocket dimension, and he nodded, grabbing his rifle again as he headed toward the door. He was down to the shotgun, the rifle, and his axe. But that was more than enough for him. He probably wouldn't need to use the shotgun again until he ran out of 1 caliber ammo.
Have fun blowing their minds. America's #1.
He said, shouldering the rifle to raise a single finger from one hand to the assembled diplomats before walking back out the security door.
All right, Amelia. Seal up the summit room. I'm on my way outside. Good. Their reinforcements are here. We could use the help.
Amelia said, as he grinned inside the suit and broke into a jog, taking large, bounding leaps down the hall he'd fought through since the gravity here was so low. Soon he was back in the loading bay he'd decimated before. As he stepped through the open door, he looked around the compound. He could see smoke rising above several broken armored crabs and a hole in the perimeter wall. Much like the guards inside, he noticed these armored shells were much fancier looking than he'd seen so far. Didn't seem to help them from being turned to scrap, however. Amelia, in her power suit, was standing in a garden of burning flowers, crab corpses all around the clawed feet of the suit. Billy Bob glanced around and noticed a few of the other Libertonian commandos on the rooftops of the buildings surrounding the Capitol building. They would dive down onto the advancing crabs in the streets, fire off a few point-blank rounds, and then fly back into the air before the crabs could lock on. It wasn't a bad plan, but he couldn't fight like that. He looked up at the massive Capitol Tower above him. About 10 stories up, he noticed an exterior ring, some sort of massive balcony that circled the tower.
Amelia, I need you to get me up there.
He pointed up as she followed his finger.
But you can't fly! Why do you think I need you to get me up there? I mean, how are you going to fight from up there?
Don't you worry about that. Just help me get up there and I'll provide you cover.
He approached the power suit as she leaned down, giving him an awkward hug as he gripped the power suit. Leaning back up, she then leaped into the air, the jets on the power suit boosting them into the sky before she landed on the balcony with a crunch. After dropping him off, she turned and jumped, aiming to land in the middle of another wave of advancing crabs. Billy Bob quickly surveyed the area as he had a commanding view of the city. 5 broad avenues split the city into districts for each of the founding species. The streets leading up from the fish cop and the scrab territory were the only ones that seemed to be busy leading troops, police, and ceremonial guards towards the Capitol building. Thankfully, they shared a border, so he only had to cover one angle of approach. He tossed the bag down, pulling out all the full magazines he had for the anti-everything rifle. 10 magazines with 10 rounds each, 7 in his current magazine and 1 in the chamber. This was the sort of word problem he wished he had back in school. With 108 bullets, how many Xenos can you kill? Depends on how good of a shot you are. He answered in his head with a grin. He crouched down behind the edge of the balcony wall, supporting his rifle as he took up the best position he could.
Hey, Amelia. They need the signal clear to broadcast whatever Emily is saying inside. But did you guys also patch into the city PA?
Yes. Why?
Can I have access?
Hold on.
He waited as he began to examine the streets and buildings ahead of him through the scope of the rifle. He wished he had a spotter. Hell, he wished he had his older sister around. She was the best shot in the family.
All right, your implant should have access now.
Amelia said as he grinned. Quickly scrolling through his playlist, he selected a song with a grin. Aiming through his scope, he saw a crab on the main avenue, waving other fish cops and ass crabs forward, looked important. Then he started the song up and pulled the trigger. Just as the first heavy bars of Stars and Stripes forever began to blare out of the city's PA system, the 1 caliber bullet struck the upper body of the crab, turning it into a mist. The round had dropped far less than he expected, which reminded him the gravity here was lower, so the bullet would drop less than usual. Either way, he was grinning as the soldiers began to huddle down, unsure what had just killed the officer.
Christ, they've never dealt with a sniper.
He muttered and took aim at an armored crab before pulling the trigger again. The butt of the rifle was strong, even with his power suit, and he chuckled a little at the feeling of firing a weapon that would literally break his arms if he fired it without assistance. He shifted his aim and fired at another armored crab. He could hear his mother in his head scolding him for being so lazy and simply aiming for center mass, but he didn't have time to get fancy, or the skill, if he was honest. Even so, center mass did just fine, as the massive rounds slammed into his targets, killing them outright. Finally, they began to scramble for cover, slowing their advance considerably as they had no experience in dealing with snipers. He was sure their computer targeting eyepieces must be able to make this sort of shot, but it seemed they were all geared for close-range combat. Those matter slammers were the only things he'd seen used at any decent distance. They also weren't very familiar with ballistic weapons, as some of them were hiding behind trash cans and signs, as if that would help. He couldn't help himself as Stars and Stripes, forever, continued to assault their ears, or whatever the crabs called their hearing, things. He began to time a few of the shots to the music, settling into his position as he fired round after round. The crabs and fish cops were now finally starting to split into the smaller side streets, moving slowly, even as he'd fire a round through a wall or corner of a building to hit a target. Compared to dense human construction, their buildings simply couldn't stand up to a high-powered sniper rifle round, especially ones the size he was using. This let the Libertonian commandos hop from roof to roof, firing down on the enemy. They weren't aiming, more just blindly firing, but their energy blasters had a lot of targets to hit, even if they weren't choosing their shots. Billy Bob had gone through about half his ammo before he discovered his mistake in playing loud music while not having anyone cover his back. He felt something slam into his side as his head slammed forward within the suit, making him glad for the pad that protected his face. He started to roll over, just in time to feel something sharp pierce his right leg and along his ribs as he cried out. Some of the ceremonial guard was still in the tower, it seemed. He was looking up at a crab with one of those energy blasters standing over him with more behind. But Billy Bob was a high-gravity human in a power suit. He gripped the crab's leg that was piercing his leg, ripping it off as it chittered and staggered forward. Rising up, he grappled it and turned, tossing the Xeno off the side of the Capitol balcony. It screeched as it fell, and Billy Bob turned to the next crab. It fired the energy blaster it held, hitting him square in the chest as he felt the heat flash through the power suit, and more of the fur got burnt away to reveal the metal beneath, making him look like some sort of Terminator ball. Swinging out with his left to clobber the crab in the face, it staggered back into the crabs behind it as he quickly picked up his shotgun. He didn't need to aim at this range as he just held the trigger down, blowing the crabs away with a hail of buckshot, splintering and punching through the walls behind them as he hosed the room beyond as well with fire and lead. He panted for a moment as he stared at the wreckage and quickly reached into his bag, pulling out the last real weapon he had. The front of it read, "Face towards enemy." He armed the claymore and jammed it into the corpse of one of the crabs, facing the way they came from before examining his internal screen.
Yes. Wounds detected. How's this thing work?
The space goblins had combined their tech with some human systems, and he noticed it was a human-engineered medical system inside. That was probably safe, since everyone had slightly different anatomy and biology, but he figured it would just inject him with that Medi biogel stuff. So he got a surprise when he activated the system and heard the computer reply.
Stapling.
Stapling? The fuck does that mean?
Then he screamed out as he felt metal staples clamp the hole in his leg shut and the cut along his side.
Motherfuckunta soletwat Barbara Streisand. NNG Getch. Who designed this shit? My mother?
Then the computerized voice spoke again.
Applying morphine and battle stimulant.
Wouldn't those just cancel out?
He asked himself before he felt something jab his neck.
Motherfoo!
He suddenly felt better. Not just better, he felt fucking fantastic. He shivered for a moment, and then quickly crouched back down to grab his rifle. For some reason, he found it even easier to swing between targets, moving on before seeing if the bullet even hit the target. The music kept playing, but he wasn't paying attention to that now. Everything seemed far away, just him and the scope. He saw the Libertonians fighting still, slowly getting thinned out by the sheer weight of advancing enemy soldiers. They were the best the Libertonians had to offer, but they were horribly outnumbered, and Billy Bob only had so many bullets. He heard a voice from far away, something about a gunship, and pulled back from his scope, seeing a low flying vehicle of some kind approaching over the city. Looking back through his scope, he got a bearing on it and saw a fishcop exosuit in the cockpit. For some reason, that was the moment he took to wonder if he should call them fish cops or fish soldiers. But then he pulled the trigger, since he realized it was going to be fish dead. For once, his shot didn't connect, as he saw some sort of shimmering field around the vehicle for a moment. The slow-moving craft began to angle away, but he quickly pulled the trigger 2 more times. The third shot apparently went through, as he saw a bullet hole in the glass of the cockpit as a smoke blocked out his view of what happened to the pilot. By the way, the ship veered sharply down into the main street, exploding and taking a few squads of soldiers with it. He figured he got the pilot. He saw another one of the flying vehicles in the back quickly turn to steer out of his line of sight.
Fall back! We've lost too many!
He heard Amelia say as his hearing began to return. Looking down, he saw her power suit pull back through the gates of the main compound. Only 3 Libertonian commandos left now. How much longer does Emily need? He asked.
I don't know, but this a fight to the end, Billy Bob. Speech or not, do you think they're going to let us leave if they catch us?
He blinked and crouched back down over his rifle.
Good point.
There was another armored crab in his sights as he pulled the trigger. Something had changed, though. They were all starting to rush forward, crabs and fish. People he still wasn't sure what best to consider the non-cops of the fish cops. He saw a much bigger fish suit and quickly took that down as well, seeing the mech suit leaking water heavily as it collapsed. Shifting his aim, he sighted another walker. This one went down heavily on top of another exosuit. There, he saw a massive crab bitch slip past one of the side streets he didn't have a good angle on. That had to be spurring everyone forward. He fired again, smashing a hole in a wall near the queen crab to try and get a better shot. But then, he heard an explosion. Leaning back from his scope, he saw another hole had been opened up in the wall to his left. Swinging the rifle around, he saw an armored crab and a large fish walker step through. He put the walker down first, as he saw the action remain open. Cursing, he reached over to grab another magazine and then looked down to see he was out. Then, he felt a rumble and a small explosion behind him and turned to see the remains of another crab squad who hadn't realized they were the enemy, and they were approaching the front of a claymore. He needed to get down to ground level, but he wasn't done here. Reaching into his bag, he pulled out the last 2 drums for his shotgun, slung that over his shoulder with his axe, and then pulled the last item out of his bag. The American flag he had been given with the case. He tied it around the barrel of his rifle, pulling a crab corpse to the edge of the balcony to help prop the rifle up, letting the flag wave over the side. Then he leaned over to stare at the 10-story drop beneath him. Would that kill him in this gravity? He rubbed his chin as he thought it over and heard the rumble of engines. Looking to his side, he saw the other gunship had circled around and finally made it to the building. Without thinking, he began to sprint towards that side of the tower, leaping as he reached full speed to sail through the air and crash into the side of the cockpit. Inside, he could see the fish pilot freaking out in his exosuit, but Billy Bob didn't give him time to react. Instead, he just punched through the glass and yanked the pilot out, tossing him screaming out to fall to the ground. The vehicle whined as he ripped part of the cockpit off to straddle the remains and grip the stick, angling it down towards the opening that Walker had made. He saw more crabs and exosuits pouring through before they pointed up at him as he drove the gunship down towards them. They turned to run back into the breach, but it was a little too late for that. As the gunship approached the ground, he jumped off to the side, trying his best to tuck and roll, but more or less just clumsily flailing, and then skidding across the ground as he bounced around inside, cursing and growling in pain. But he still had his axe and shotgun as he stood up, just in time for the gunship to hit the breach and explode, sending him flying once more as what was left of the fake fur on the suit caught fire. He also gasped in pain as he felt something sharp dig through his lower back. As he rolled onto his side, he looked down to see a length of rebar, or the Xeno equivalent, had impaled him through the back and out the stomach. Groaning out, he dropped the shotgun and gripped the length of rebar. His display was warning about the rising heat, since most of him was on fire still, but he had to ignore it as he yanked the rebar out, screaming as he did, and then once more as the suit stapled the wound shut. He could feel the heat around his legs grow ever hotter before his skin started to burn, and he finally started to roll around to put the fire out. He felt another jab in his neck and was too tired to curse, but the pain faded and his energy rose once more. Reaching out to grab his shotgun, he struggled to his feet and looked at the main gate. Amelia was standing near a statue as the two Libertonian commandos he could see crouched behind it. The armored crabs all seemed to be dead, but the regular ones were pouring through as he saw that fat queen crab. By now, his suit was just exposed metal. A few holes in it, thanks to all he'd been through, and the two spare drums he'd grabbed were nowhere to be seen after his ride on the gunship. So he just charged forward screaming as he fired what he had left. It was a good thing he didn't have to aim very well for it to be effective, since he could see his vision starting to blur a bit